thinking about moving my dragon-guarded tower to another kingdom. What do you think?
The damsel asked the king, who was there on his twice annual brunch visit. The young king, who had newly inherited a position at Camelot, did a spit take with his coffee. You can do that, fair maiden Adara? The dragon will just let you up and move?
Adara, who had red hair down to her waist and a scowl of ferocious intensity, humored the naive young monarch. We don't have a typical dragon-damsel relationship, you see. She clued him in. I am a fire witch, and my dragon is my familiar. Using the technical term, my dragon is my angel beast, a beast formed of angelic substance that communicates telepathically with my innermost self. Haven't you noticed how my dragon changes color and size to reflect my moods, King Percival?
The dragon serves the kingdom and obeys the king's commands in time of need. That is all my father told me, said the young Percival, somewhat taken aback. Nervously, he adjusted his coronet on his forehead.
Well, of course the dragon serves the kingdom because I serve the kingdom, Adara burst out. But I'm telling you, I'm bored of serving this kingdom. I've been here for several hundred years, and I swear I have every stone in this frickin' Tower of Shalott where you keep me memorized. I require stimulation, company, inspiration, and who here will provide it to me?
You have your magic mirror for company, the king said placatingly, pointing to it. It was currently showing a scene of jumping dolphins in a bay.
That's just it,
said Adara, and a little tear leaked out of the corner of one eye.
I can watch people in my magic mirror, but they never talk back. And no one ever visits me here except out of royal duty. They're too afraid of me and my magic and my dragon. The other day I saw this handsome musician in my magic mirror riding down the road to Camelot, his black cloak, floating behind him in the breeze. He was whistling. I could hear him. I even whistled a little harmony to his tune. But could he hear me? No. Do you have any idea how lonely I get?
But surely you cannot just leave and attach yourself to another kingdom, said King Percival, beginning to panic. As if by chance, his hand caressed the chest of crystals Adara had painstakingly filled with magic power. The witch's rent, his recently deceased father, had called the magic crystals. Mind you collect it from her twice a year. Pretend it's a social call. She likes that.
You're acting like I'm a prisoner, Adara laughed. Your grandfather started the rumor that I was his prisoner because some of the employees of Camelot Corporation were nervous having a witch around and wanted to feel like someone was keeping her under control. You boys are much more comfortable with technology than magic, aren't you? For all that you named your corporation after the legendary King Arthur's realm, it makes you nervous to be around forces outside your control.
I was told you were a ward of our corporation's state, said Percival, who, after all, was a king mainly for branding purposes. He wondered why the Liberty... Sorry, I completely lost. I think when you scroll, I lose my place.
No worries. This is an amateur production. He wondered why the liberty of the resident fire witch had not been covered in the onboarding paperwork when he took over as CEO of the floating island of Camelot upon his father's death. I haven't been a ward of the state since I came of age, said Adara impatiently. Yes, when my father was arrested for inventing the art of necromancy and instigating massive zombie warfare, I was only 5 years old. I had to become a ward of the state then. Who else would look after me? But I haven't been a ward of the state since I turned 18 years old. And now I'm 243.
You don't look a day over 242, said Percival,
Thank you.
attempting gallantry, and won a little laugh from the damsel Adara after all.
I know, I look like I'm barely 18, she said, but magic users age slowly. We can be counted on to last a good 1,000 years, if not more. It's because we know how to handle our relationship with death and make sure he doesn't get too up close and personal.
Is that why? Said Percival. I am indeed fortunate to be in the company of a lady both so beautiful and so wise. His hands closed firmly over the chest of magic crystals, which was glowing light out from between its hinges. When I was a young boy, I longed to visit your tower, but my father always forbade me. He said it was too dangerous.
Oh, but I would have loved to see you. How unfair.
Percival confidently moved his hand from the chest of jewels to wrap it around Adara's fingers. If your heart calls for adventure, then indeed you must leave, but I have to admit it will break my own heart a little to have the radiant and mysterious lady I have longed to know all my life wrested away at the very instant I begin to know her a little. He looked at her with puppy dog eyes.
Oh, don't say that, Adara cried. Indeed, the king and the fire witch barely see each other, truly. I've never had company more than twice a year.
I hate to criticize my honored ancestors, said Percival, but they were fools to take such little advantage of your company. Indeed, I would love to come here as often as my royal duties permit. At least, I beg of you, tarry just a little while, so I may help you decide between the many kingdoms that would love to fall at your feet.
Adara was quite blown away.
Try this scone, Percival added. It's delicious. He broke off a corner of the lemon and blueberry scone and placed it in her breathless mouth with his own royal fingers. The dragon, watching from the window, let out. Neither of them paid any mind. That evening, King Percival got to watch his royal minister of finance, referred to in reports and shareholders back home as the chief financial officer of Camelot, fall into a panic. We absolutely cannot lose the magic crystals the Shallot Division provides, the bureaucrat informed him. They support nearly 40% of our gross yearly revenue. Surely you are aware that Adara is literally the only human resource located in the Tower of Shalott, and we pay her nothing, the king complained. I've been going over the accounts. They are most irregular. Possession is 9/10 of the law in a wild frontier domain like Liminus, the finance minister reminded him, and Percival was forced to agree. The floating island of Camelot was located in the misty dimension of Liminus that all travelers moved through when they were transporting goods and people between dimensions. The rules tended to be a little bendy in Liminus, as magic and technologies and customs and morals from several different dimensions clashed in wild anarchy. Unfortunately, we cannot enforce possession, said Percival. I have confirmed the dragon is entirely under her control. Really? Said King Percival's right-hand knight, down on the payroll as chief of security. I can't believe my briefings didn't include that when I took over this job. Right there with you, buddy, said Percival with a sympathetic smile, but I've got a plan. Listen, Adara hasn't done anything for the past 238 years but read books, watch her magic mirror, and fill our crystals with power. She doesn't have any friends. I can guarantee she's never had any contact with those failed union organizers we chased out a few years back. She's smart, but just book smart, not street smart. So what's the plan? His royal cabinet asked him, leaning in close and breathless. I marry her. We can keep paying her nothing that way, and it takes care of that little 1/10 of a legal problem we have. Brilliant! The finance minister immediately complimented him. Are you sure you're okay with that? I mean, personally? Asked the right hand knight a little uneasily. That witch gives me the creeps. She's not too ugly. It'll be fine. But thank you for caring about me, said Percival, giving his knight a grateful pat on the back. After all, shareholder profits come first, don't they? The courtship proved no problem. After all, Adara hadn't gotten laid in over 200 years, and Percival was the first non-elderly man who would spend any significant time with her. She was quite prepared to view Percival as a paragon in all things. However, the marriage itself proved a problem. Adara started demanding queenly duties and to be involved in palace functions and entertainment. The first wasn't so bad. Adara turned out to be very good at math, and the finance minister was thrilled to have her in his department. The second proved to be more awkward. You see, my dear, I love you with all my heart, but you just don't look like a queen, Percival was forced to explain to her one contentious night.
Adara blushed in shame. How do I not look like a queen? She asked.
Well, there are all those freckles.
I'll make a magic anti-freckle cream. Where's the problem?
And there's the issue of your height.
I'm supposed to be taller? No problem. I'll wear enchanted shoes. I can boost myself up to 1 inch short of yours. Is that regal enough, Percival?
And your red hair. It's so untamed.
Conditioner and dye. I'll dim down the wild red color and to sort of silky strawberry blonde. I know how princesses and queens are supposed to look. I'm not stupid. You know, I've watched all 179 episodes of What Princess Is This?
That's impressive. Look, sweetheart, I don't want to bring this up, and you know, I personally think you're flawless, but the people expect...
What do they expect?
Someone a little skinnier, you know, he said in a tiny voice, as if embarrassed Adara had dragged it out of him.
Adara stared at her shoes for a long minute. She didn't know what to think. She felt hot all over, as if her flesh was suddenly an inconvenient coat she didn't know how to take off. It was the first time in her entire life she'd felt like under her skin there was some kind of problem. It wasn't a nice feeling, but she was determined to join society. So she raised her eyes. She shook it off. I'm an accomplished illusionist, she told her husband. I'll wear an enchanted corset.
In the end, Percival had to give in. There really was no good reason to tell her not to attend
parties with him. The real reason, of course, was that she now understood the company finances somewhat better than him, and he was afraid she would make him look dumb in front of important guests. But perhaps an intern could be deputized to strategically deflect her away from anyone truly important. Can we have that musician I saw in my mirror perform in the annual gala?
Sure, whatever, said Percival. He didn't have the energy for another fight.
When it was time for the annual gala, Adara dressed with care. She loved her husband very much, and she didn't want to let him down or make him look bad in front of the visiting CEO kings and CEO queens from the floating islands of Liminus. She had memorized no less than 5 volumes of etiquette, and she had watched every romantic comedy her magic mirror could provide, with all its 9 antennas and 6 runestones. But even given that extensive preparation, she was a little nervous of her social skills. They weren't very road-tested. She hoped she wouldn't make a fool of herself in public. It helped her to feel more confident if she looked good. For the first time in many years, Adara asked her mirror to show her herself instead of some distant and more interesting scene. She beamed into the mirror. She liked what she saw. More importantly,
she hoped Percival would like what he saw. The conjugal visits had been petering off lately. Her frizzy red hair had been smoothed down into coils of submissive pinkness. Her emerald platform shoes were enchanted not to trip her. Her jewels glowed cheerfully with a friendly flicker. Her overdress was her favorite forest green, her underdress a crisp and dazzling white. She put her emerald tiara on her head and said firmly to herself, "Every inch a queen."
Every inch a queen! Every inch!
Then she hurried off
to eat as many deviled eggs as possible before they were all forced to sit down to listen to speeches and annual reports. "What unusual entertainment," she heard the King of Valhalla say, frowning at the program as she hurried past him, hell-bent on securing those deviled eggs. "Isn't it wonderful?" She stopped to beam at him. "I ordered them up special. I figure we've had enough stuffy harp quartets to last a lifetime, don't you?"
"A company of free scamps?" The visiting king harumphed, perusing the fine print. "I have heard of them. Don't they usually perform in bars, taverns, university campuses? A radical choice to have such a body band of minstrels performing at such an illustrious gathering."
Oh, but you're going to love it! They do illusion magic too, and tricks with fire. It makes the plays and songs so interesting. I've watched them in my magic mirror 100 times.
Charmed despite himself, the icy CEO king of Valhalla Corporation, the monopolistic overlord of all undertakers, hospitals, and emergency medical services in the dimension of Limitus, melted a bit before her vivacious
warmth. I do have vivacious warmth. Thank you for noticing. And of course, he said, "We'll see," with a reluctant twitch on the corner of his mouth, which an excessively generous narrator might have called a smile. Indeed, the King of Valhalla ought not to have feared, because conscious of the corporate audience, the company of free scamps had left the rhyming swear words at home and were performing a musical dramatization of Lamia, a classic poem by Keats. It was about a snake woman that shed her scales to wed a mortal man. Adara's dragon, who had cleverly concealed herself as a dragon-shaped golden necklace, was so moved by it, she squeezed Adara's neck quite tightly.
Adara was debating whether to ask the performers for an autograph when, heaven help her, the lead singer and guitarist approached her. "Your Majesty," he said with a bow as the crowd dispersed to talk corporate politics and find the open bar. "Thank you for your gracious patronage. I can only hope our selection was to your liking. My name is Zohar."
"I know. I follow all your updates on Shadowgram."
"I have a shadowgram?" said Zohar in great astonishment. Then he shouted, Da Vinci! Da Vinci! Why did you make me a shadowgram?" Da Vinci was a 1-foot-tall talking rat. He rarely performed in the plays, but he did tell fortunes, and he was the evil genius behind most of the company's special effects. Talking animals were not uncommon in the misty dimension of Limitus, though there were none in Camelot's home dimension, which was more technologically oriented. "I made you a shadowgram because we need the publicity," Da Vinci informed Zohar sourly. For some reason, the tweens would rather drool over your smoldering eyes than my quivering whiskers. I can't believe you made me a shadowgram without asking me. Then, pulling out his hollow watch, he began tapping it. How many followers do I have? He called up the number to hover above his wrist and stared at it with a sour expression on his face. Terrifyingly many, and yet somehow not enough. You have cursed me, Da Vinci. Now, no longer will I wake up in the morning and ask myself, what birds fills my ears with such sweet strains? What adventures await me in the day ahead? Instead, every day for the rest of my life, I shall wake up and ask myself, how many followers do I have on Shadowgram? He pulled a face of exaggerated, comical dismay.
If you feel that way, why don't you just delete your shadowgram, Zohar?
Don't delete it, Da Vinci advised. From over in a pile of magical-looking snake scales he was repacking into some kind of jar.
Pandora's box has been opened, Zohar informed Adara. Now that monstrous creature of my vanity has been awakened, it will never be appeased. I cannot delete it. I am now condemned to check my shadowgram forever.
Although, Zohar said over his shoulder to Da Vinci, I must object to the characterization of my eyes as smoldering. Smoldering implies some kind of inner fire. My soul is cold, dark, and dead, and the lifeless coals of my eyes ought to reflect that. Then you can choose your own filters on Shadowgram, said Da Vinci, in the manner of one who did not have time for this bullshit. Thank you, I shall, said Zohar, scrolling through the application with a flourishing delight that belied his supposed disdain. I can't believe my mustache is entirely uncombed in my most liked hologram, he said, pausing before an image of himself with his cape thrown over his shoulder, rippling gently in the wind. Adara remembered liking that hollow several weeks ago.
Why do you say your soul is cold and empty? Said Adara, intrigued. Despite herself, her dragon was uncoiling from its docile pretext of being a golden necklace. If it got too excited, it was going to get bigger and bigger. So she tried to control her emotions. I said my soul is cold and dark, Zohar corrected pedantically. My soul is not empty. My soul is uncomfortably crowded with all manner of inner demons.
With a sigh and a shake, he turned off Shadowgram and pulled up a chair, sitting on it backwards and leaning his arms against the top. He peered soulfully up at the Queen. Over near the podium on the other side of the reception hall, another of the company of free scamps magicians was entertaining a gaggle of nobles with an enthusiastic exhibition of fire juggling techniques. Except for the hairy Da Vinci cleaning up the stage, Zohar and Adara were temporarily alone. So, Zohar smoldered at Adara. You never did say what you thought of our play. It's based on one of my favorite poems. A Lamia snake creature is not that much more than a poor cousin to the noble dragon, but I still thought it a fitting tribute to the Dragon Queen of Camelot. No.
You know about my dragon? Adara squeaked.
Her dragon, thrilled to be recognized, uncoiled from her neck, turned a pleased green, and fluffed itself up to the size of a whole feather boa. Terribly embarrassed, Adara looked around in all directions to see if anyone had noticed her necklace transform into an active, curious, plumed reptile, but luckily the fire tricks had everyone distracted. Lorenzo, the chief magician of the company, had made a fire replica of the Lamia monster and was making it dance around him in a circle while everyone oohed and awed. Zohar extended his fingers to the dragon, who delicately sniffed them, much like a pleased cat. Adara caught her breath. She was charmed. Most people simply ran away from her dragon screaming, and she couldn't help liking Zohar very, very much simply because he hadn't. Of course I know about your dragon, said Zohar in an annoyed tone of voice. It's the chief reason I came to this court. I usually avoid places like Camelot, much too stuffy for me. God, spare me from ever having to hear the phrase shareholder profit ever again.
What's wrong with profit? Said Adara, feeling a need to defend her home.
Oh, yes, dragons, that's right. They like treasure, don't they? Well, hello, sweetheart. Yes, you can lick my fingers. Just don't burn them. Oh, oh. And suddenly the entire dragon was joyously wrapped around Zohar's neck.
I am so sorry. She's never done that before.
Not at all. Absolutely honored, said Zohar, adjusting the dragon like a scarf. She now appeared to be purring, and with her purrs, little puffs of steam came out of her nostrils. What's more, Adara could somehow feel Zohar's velvet-draped bony shoulders through her dragon skin. She frantically tried to keep her dragon from turning pink. That would give away far too much.
Give her back to me, she ordered imperiously, stretching out her arm, and Zohar peeled the reluctant dragon off him.
Claw by claw. I have a penchant for monsters, said Zohar, returning the dragon with one final pet, being one myself.
Why are you calling yourself a monster?
On the outside, I appear to be a handsome musician, nothing more than an accomplished bard and master illusionist, I know. But on the inside, I have a terrible past. I consider myself bitterly isolated from the greater mass of humanity, you know. That's why I empathize with the Lamia monster in Keats's poem.
It was clever of her to find a way to shed her scales, said Adara, stroking her own dragon scales thoughtfully. The dragon meeped indignantly and dug her claws into Adara's wrist as if in fear. But Adara stared off into the distance and pretended not to notice.
Only Zohar noticed the panicked little creature's claws had drawn a drop or two of blood. The Lamia's transformation was
very painful, you know. I didn't mind that the transformation was painful in the poem. It made it realistic. Such beautiful lines. Oh, how did it go? Left to herself, the serpent now began to change. Her elfin blood and madness ran, her mouth foamed, and the grass therewith besprent. Withered at dew so sweet and virulent. Her eyes in torture fixed, in anguish drear, hot glazed and wide, with lid lashes all sear, flashed phosphor and sharp sparks, without one cooling tear.
So our play was not new to you then, said Zohar with a sharp eye.
Oh, no, it was quite new. I'm rather new to Keats. I knew he was a famous poet in our ancient homeworld before we came to the luminous dimension, but I tend to prefer more modern and contemporary artists.
Then you remembered those lines after only hearing them once?
I remember most things, and I thought it was very romantic that she was willing to endure, such pain to be with the man she loved.
Do you think love is more romantic when it is painful?
Oh, she jumped and turned around. A massive winged wolf, as tall at the shoulder as she was high, was standing before her. Oh, she said, "You're Zev! I recognize you from the Company of Free Scamps posters. You're larger than I realized from the pictures."
Pleased to make your acquaintance, Your Majesty. Feeling uncomfortably close to the massive jaws, Adara backed up a step or two, only to be transfixed by the beauty of the enormous golden eyes.
Isn't love generally painful?
It has been my experience, agreed Zohar. In my experience, love has been pure joy, said Zev, and his golden eyes seemed to fill all Adara's world until he blinked and the spell was broken. Then Zev flew off to entertain the crowd by loop-de-looping through giant rings of fire. You should study more ancient poetry, said Zohar after a little pause. I believe you would find it rewarding, since you live in the Tower of Shalat here. Have you ever read the poem about the Lady of Shalat?
I didn't know the company named my tower after a poem.
Most things in Camelot are from poems. It was a fancy of the company founder, who was an English lit major before he came to Liminus to seek his fortune, I believe. It was he who started the fashion of calling the
companies that operate here kingdoms. It gave them more credibility to people who come here from magical worlds instead of technological ones. You must be very fond of history, Zohar, said Adara, who was already calling up the Lady of Shalat poem on her holo watch. This part reminds me of you, Zohar. The sun came dazzling through the leaves and flamed upon the brazen greaves of bold Sir Lancelot. I saw you through my magic mirror, and just that way, when you were riding down the road with the leaf shadows falling over you.
Do the security cameras of Camelot extend so far that they observe my private travels, milady?
Oh, they gave me access to the entire network to keep me from getting bored, but I only use it to access trivia. I'm no trained security analyst. Ain't got the patience for that.
I see. Heaven save me from being Sir Lancelot. I bet he has to have his mustache combed in every Shadowgram picture.
Just let me read more of this. Wait. This poem is dreadful! The poor Lady of Charlotte dies in the end, just like the poor Lamia! Oh, why do the woman in old stories always die? Why?
I'm so sorry, my dear Majesty. The very last thing I wanted was to cause you any kind of distress.
Listen to this. Under tower and balcony, by garden wall and gallery, a pale, pale corpse she floated by, dead cold, between the houses high, dead into towered Camelot. Oh, it's so sad. I can't handle. It's so sad. Oh my God.
Then suddenly her hair got a great deal redder and seemed to flame at the ends with subtle sparks like candle wicks about to burst into light. Her dragon flushed red and fierce and big as a wolf now, prancing and pawing at the floor by her feet.
This Lady of Shalat isn't going to die, Zohar. I'm going to live. Live!
No one ever doubted it, Majesty, said Zohar, looking a bit terrified. Da Vinci interrupted. If you are quite done flirting with the royalty, Zohar, I could use help cleaning up our props.
We're
Not
not flirting.
said Adara and Zohar in unison and glared at each other.
There was an awkward pause while Da Vinci rolled his eyes. But I have a feeling this conversation isn't finished, said Zohar.
And somehow, I don't think we can finish this discussion over Shadowgram. Zohar handed her a small violet glass bottle with a gold stopper. Drink this before bed, and you will dream of me. It's the best way to keep in touch.
Isn't that a little creepy?
Don't people call you creepy sometimes? Said Zohar, his eyes glimmering. Isn't it the fate of magic users to be deemed creepy by the populace who don't understand their magic?
I think people just think I'm creepy because my father invented necromancy and my soul is externalized as a fire-breathing dragon. If it wasn't for that, they'd like my personality just fine. You generally are a bit creepy.
Da Vinci laughed.
But I'm too curious to turn this down. So, I'll see you in my dreams. And
she smiled at Zohar, the same smile of exuberant warmth that had melted the frosty king of Valhalla. It took over her face so completely that it took Zohar's breath away. So he hurried away as fast as he could to pack away his gear. Adara was seated by herself in a corner, delicately slipping a glass of plum wine, when King Percival finally remembered to hurry over and claim her. Why were you talking to the king of Valhalla earlier? He demanded, popping into the chair beside her. He was annoyed because the intern he had assigned to keep Adara out of trouble had spent the evening schmoozing on his own behalf instead of shadowing the queen.
I was just reassuring him he would enjoy the entertainment.
Ah, yes, the entertainment. It's a good thing people liked it. Then a smile took over Percival's face, as if against his will. I have to admit, the fire juggling was epic. Then, with a noticeable effort, he put away his smile and resumed his look of annoyance. Just don't get the idea that because your pick turned out okay this time, you'll always get to pick. We understand these royals, my cabinet and I. You blundered into pleasing them out of luck this time. I only let you pick the musicians this time because I love you so much. You get that. I figured. You know what I figured? If I'm embarrassed by these scruffy musicians, at least my wife knows I love her. That's what I figured. That's why I let you choose. He then leaned back and waited to be thanked. Adara obliged. She gave him an enthusiastic little kiss on the cheek, which he sighed and rolled his eyes through.
Oh, it was amazing of you to let me pick the musicians. I'm so grateful.
And clasped her hands together. King Percival then calmed himself and basked in his own generosity, patting her cheek as one would pat a good dog that had just been given a treat. You were talking to that musician for an awfully long time, he said as an afterthought. What were you talking about?
Adara's cheeks grew hot as she remembered how Da Vinci had accused her of flirting. We mostly talked about social media.
You're not on social media, are you?
Oh, I have accounts on most of the major platforms.
What? That could be a PR disaster for the kingdom. You must delete them immediately, said the image-conscious Percival.
What? But I barely ever post. I just use them to lurk, really, and chat with an occasional friend, maybe.
Why do you need online friends? You have me. Come now, the evening's wrapping up. And he took her hand in a firm grip and towed her back to the Tower of Shalott, where he left her.
Dara, obedient as always to her husband's wishes, sat up late that night and delete, deleted her accounts one by one, crying. If you had asked her even yesterday, she would have said social media wasn't very important to her. After all, what did she have to talk about except being shut up in the tower? It wasn't like anyone wanted to see pictures of a big, ugly dragon. Her dragon, who heard all her thoughts, whimpered and grew smaller when she heard Adara think the words big and ugly. But Adara didn't notice. However, now that it came to the point of deleting everything, Adara found that it hurt. She would miss liking pictures of people's breakfasts and children, feeling like she knew the latest jokes, even if they were all strangers. It was comforting to hear from them. It helped her feel more like an ordinary sort of person, knowing that people loved breakfast sausages in Valhalla, and that children in Poetwood loved to swing from rope swings. It doesn't matter, she told herself when she had finished deleting everything. Sitting in her window seat with her shawl tightly wrapped around her, she felt cold down to her bones. In a way, the shawl couldn't really warm up. It doesn't matter, she repeated hollowly. Now I have a real person in my life, my husband, who really loves me. That's more important than all that online crap.
Her hand hovered over her hollow watch. Usually, at this time of night, she would check accounts from the flower fairies who live in the upper canopy of Poetwood and see the pictures they posted of the moon and the stars, the selfies they took with their pet fireflies, and their on-repeat speed videos of night blossoms opening. Either that, or she would watch bakers in the various royal kitchens all over the limitless dimension demonstrate their cake frosting techniques, which for some reason was equally soothing. But all these apps were deleted from her holowatch now. She could check her magic mirror for stealth footage, but that wasn't social. That was her backdoor into Camelot's surveillance system. It wasn't the same. Although it was spring outside, the frost flowers slowly grew across her window, nearby where her hand rested. Then suddenly the catch of the window opened. Adara gave a long, deep sigh and pushed up the window in resignation.
You again,
she said to the dark figure that floated outside. Her dragon was cowering in fear on the ground at the base of the tower. Its paws held over its eyes. The old girl never did like it when Death came to visit. Death pulled down his black hood, exposing his handsome, thin freckled face with the long eyelashes and strangely thin lips. Hello, Adara.
I didn't ask for a visit, Death.
Yes, but I could feel how lonely you were. Death replied, and put his long, thin, cold hand on hers. She could feel the frost flowers forming across her skin now, the same ones that had formed across the window. It hurt for a moment, the sting of the cold, and then suddenly the numbness was a relief. She could feel the same numbness spreading out from her hand and seeping into her bones. She looked up into Death's black eyes, as always, wondering what was hidden at the bottom of them. His hair was as red as her own, but it looked orange and washed out in the moonlight.
I'm not lonely. I have meaningful work, a loving husband, a luxurious life. Musicians at my beck and call, for God's sake. Everything I could have ever wanted. Why are you calling me lonely?
You'll always be lonely until you come to join me, said Death.
And his hand crept further up her arm. Almost involuntarily, but filled with a great longing, Adara leaned out the window so her face could be closer to Death's.
He was riding a giant blackish purple flying eel, swam through the air as easily as smaller eels swim through the seas. It made her stomach churn to see the wriggles and ripples through its body as it hung in the outside air before her window. But the fierce longing in Death's eyes, the desire for her and only her, compelled her. Death's hands tightened on her forearm, and she noticed their lips were only inches apart. She jerked away. She pried Death's grabbing hand off her arm. Death chuckled, and his eels swam in a circle before returning to her window. If you are so content and happy and complete, Adara, said Death, his quiet and controlled voice suddenly intense, why isn't your husband here tonight? His warm arms do not want you. My cold arms do. I am the only one, Adara, the only one in your entire life who will always be there for you.
I am not ready to join you yet. I'm a powerful sorceress. I have hundreds of years ahead of me. How dare you talk to me like this? What cheek? What presumption?
But she adjusted her nightgown a little so Death could better admire her cleavage, and while her lips reproved, her mouth smiled. Death's lips tightened in a grin of hope, and he rose a little closer to her. All right, then, you're not ready, but set a poor suitor's heart at rest. Give me just a kiss, just a little kiss. You know you will feel better for it. You always do.
I need no kisses from you.
But I pine for you, Adara. And she knew it to be true. Ordinary people, I get to embrace them after several decades, 10 or 11 at most.
It's true.
How much longer will you keep me waiting at your window? What have you got to live for? You aren't really important to anyone, after all. Your husband loves you, but you know very well he sees you as a liability, a social embarrassment. That's why he made you delete your accounts. Who benefits from your existence? I would benefit from your non-existence. It would bring me such joy. Come and join me. Adara held out her arm.
Just a taste. Don't get too close.
She tapped a little spot on the back of her hand.
You may salute me here. And then I will forget my loneliness. Then I will be able to sleep.
Death bent over her arm, kissing her on the very spot she had indicated. And then he flew away into the night, where his lips had rested, blood welled up, dark as darkest wine in the light from the frosty stars. It brought the usual relief and the usual guilt as well. Everyone already thought she was a creepy witch. Imagine what they would think of her if they knew what kind of conversations she had with Death. But sometimes when she felt this terrible, Death was the only person in her life who made her feel special, who gave her sensations strong enough to help her forget herself. That was why she kept seeing him. She put a band-aid over the red kiss mark and closed her eyes, trying to forget, trying to believe that hope would come in the morning, but sleep eluded her. Tossing and turning, her eyes finally came to rest on the little glass bottle Zohar had given her.
I need not be lonely in my dreams,
she thought, reaching for it, hoping eagerly for Zohar's company. She let herself fall asleep moments after she took her little sip. Dear reader, fear not. Things get better for Adara. This is her loneliest moment. Things are all uphill from here. Stay tuned for the next episode if you want hijinks, adventure, and the possessions of some undeserving people to go up in smoke and flames.
Wow.